I think my realization by the time I finished university to decide to become an entrepreneur came from the simple realization that, everyone, and absolutely everyone, was winging it. Everyone was sort of making it up as they went along. No one had been to the end of life to come back to tell us how it kind of works. So if everybody else was winging it, why couldn't I? And I remember having dinner with my parents building up to this sort of end of university period. And I remember thinking, and I love my parents. My parents are amazing. They're the pillars and the anchors of my whole world. And I remember sitting in that dinner table thinking, oh my God, they are winging it too. It was almost a terrifying and a liberating moment. It was almost like the earth sort of shook, where I realized it was terrifying in that I was wondering, am I the last one in on the joke? And everybody else sort of knew all along. But it was also liberating in that I could finally be free to actually make a choice for my life and not be beholden to an idea or a hope that something else out there knows better for my life. And really that's what pushed me sort of over the edge. I think many other people become entrepreneurs for different reasons. Maybe you do want to become a boss. Maybe you do want to tell people what to do. Maybe you do want to build cool stuff. For me, it was much more of this emotional journey, this paradigm shift. And as I thought about what conditions would give me the opportunity to be able to decide how I spent my time and what I gave my attention to, it became clear that through a process of elimination, that entrepreneurship was probably the only thing that could give me that. I looked at the job opportunities and the like, and having done this business science, computer science degree, which sort of mixes programming and business management, it felt I was either going to end up in sort of a software development house and so purely as a sort of a coder being told what to build, or I was going to end up as a business analyst at a management consulting company. And there wasn't a place where I could just bring my whole self, where I could decide how I sort of spent my time. And that's why I was like, that isn't going to work out. And even though I didn't know what would work out, I was pretty much done with just going with the flow. And my parents definitely struggled with the decision initially. Of course, I was supposed to go to a blue chip firm and get some experience and the like. And the conversations I had with my father building up to that, I remember him, trying to encourage me to at least do a couple of years. And I said to him, can you guarantee me, Dad? Can you guarantee me that if I do this thing and go to these companies and this great experience with these big brands, can you guarantee me that I will be happy and successful? And he goes quietly like, no, I can't. Well, then I'll take the chances on my own terms and see how it pans out. At the end of the day, I could still get a job, but it was important for me to try and make this shift now. And luckily, there were a couple of other guys in my class who, for their own reasons, were desperate not to get a job. And we started talking. And we started meeting and brainstorming around what we could do, because we obviously had to have a plan. We hadn't applied for jobs, so we hadn't accepted any jobs, and our parents would sort of kill us if we didn't actually come up with a plan. So we thought, let's start a business. And we're like, okay, so what's this business going to do? And we thought, as students, we've never had money to make any calls. Mobile costs back in 2004-05 were ridiculously expensive. And then smartphones were getting smarter. We had Bluetooth, we had Wi-Fi. We thought maybe there's a different world. There might be a different way to communicate altogether in the future. And we've seen stuff like Skype, but it was only on your desktop. And who walks around with our computer? And most of us didn't have our own computers to be Skyping from anyway. So we thought, there has to be something we can do about internet calls on mobile phones. And that's how we sort of started trying to scratch that itch and fix that problem that we had faced. So post our graduation in December of 2005, we met up again early 2006 and started trying to prototype this product. And about 9 months later, we had a version that worked about half of the time in what is now sort of considered mobile VoIP, or what you now experience as WhatsApp and Viber calls. But this is back in 2006, before iPhone, before Android, if you can remember such a time. And it was a very difficult time to be developing software on mobile phones. And for me, that was an amazing journey when we had that product working in our hands, because there wasn't anything anyone could have taught us. It's not like this is something Microsoft was doing and we could have gone somewhere to learn it. We literally searched online every day, each step of the way, how to build the software, how to run a business, how to write this part of the business plan. And we taught ourselves most of everything that we needed to know that year online. And we literally Googled our way through that time to success. And when the first version of Yego launched in February 2007, there were a couple of other entities around the world, one in the UK, one in Israel, that were launching. But it was just cutting edge. And in those couple of weeks, this sort of wave had turned. And it was amazing to be part of that, because I remember, waking up from underneath my desk because we were passing out on the floor, not getting enough sleep and things, and realizing, oh my God, we imagined this and now it's a reality. Now people are using our products on our phones. And that whole creation process for me was so powerful, because to be able to manifest an idea into reality like that was definitely one of the most transformative experiences, because it showed me just how much power technology and the internet can give students who had no social or financial capital, sitting in a tiny little apartment with very slow ADSL connection. Yet we could build world-class software. And that's, every time I think about it, I still can't believe we managed to do that. So after prototyping this platform that we would call Yego for about 9 months, we had a version that worked half of the time, and that allowed us to actually get our first round of angel investment. Now we had a product, we had a business plan, and people could see that we were sort of serious. And after 9 months of not getting anywhere with funding, some people actually started to listen to us. And through the network of advisors we had, we found a group of 3 gentlemen that were willing to invest in the business, and that allowed us to actually get the servers and the resources to be able to launch that first version. After about a year, though, it became very clear to us that what we thought was a sustainable model wouldn't actually work, because this, remember, before iPhone, Android, before App Store, so people didn't put credit cards into their phone to buy stuff. This was before App Stores, so you couldn't be able to market your sort of app that way. The only way was to be able to buy advertising on other online platforms. So getting users, getting money was very hard, and we had ideally wanted users to spend money on us to buy Yego out credits, the same sort of thing like Skype out credits, but that wasn't really happening, and that consumer market was unsustainable. So we thought to ourselves, what other market could pay for these services? And it became apparent that the business market would be better, because at least you could do EFTs and you could call them frequently and you could have a relationship, and people were used to paying in that way. And over and above that, in an office environment, the internet infrastructure is also better quality control, and that affects sort of VoIP quality and the like, which is still a huge problem back then. So we thought, we've got to shift, but none of us have ever worked in a business. We don't know what a corporate looks like. What are we going to do? How are we going to find these customers? And at the same time, we're running out of money. So one of the other angles of the business model we had was to white label the mobile software that we had for other VoIP providers around the world. And one of the companies that we had done this for was a local VoIP operator called Telfree, and essentially, they were now very keen for us to build more stuff for them. And they were then interested in investing in the business, and they ultimately acquired a 51% stake at the end of 2009 in Yego, which allowed us to resource the team a lot more and actually build out products. And we spent a few more years building other VoIP platforms. We also built like a cloud-hosted PABX. So instead of the PBX that sits in your office, how can you have one where you can organize your extensions and everything on a desktop? Really cool stuff like that, and a whole lot of other telecom sort of related software. And along the journey, it became apparent to us that, telecoms is ultimately not our first prize market to have been in. We were ultimately software people, and now we're sort of getting sucked more and more into the telecom side of it. And on top of it, it's a huge economies of scale business. You either buy another business or you get bought. And until you get really significant scale, you won't be able to turn sort of substantial sort of profits. And thinking through these things, it became apparent that, maybe we're not strategically aligned with our partners now, and maybe they have a sort of a different view. And after 7 years, you're also very tired. You want to maybe try something else. And I certainly was itching to do my own sort of thing again. And we had an amazing journey. But it was also difficult to come to a realization where you see that you've outgrown your baby and it's no longer your baby even. And actually, maybe it's time for you to work on another baby. That was a really difficult time to to see that transition and to get to a point where you are willing to walk away from something to sort of that you started. But it was an important thing to do, because I think in business you always have to realize when people's expectations and visions have crossed and no longer sort of aligned, and then that's not a great place for you to be, and you need to sort of do something else afterwards. So that's how I decided, let me take a bit of a break. I was severely burnt out, slept for a few months, finally got my little gap year kind of thing that I'd hoped for many years back. And I considered maybe going to business school. I applied to some of the top business schools, but interestingly, none of them accepted me. So I was like, oh, well, do I start my next business? And in starting my next business, there'd been an idea that had been stewing in my head for quite a while, and that we never had time for while building Jago. And now I was like, this thing has been on my mind for a really long time. And one thing I'd learned in that process is that there's no such thing as an easy or a smart business. You're more likely to succeed when you do something that you're authentically connected to, something that's been woven through your sort of life history, your life journey. Because if you think that you're going to start a smart business, you realize there's no such thing, and whatever you start, no matter how simple and easy it looks, is going to take everything out of you. And after it's taken everything out of you, it's going to take even more. And you're going to need to know why you're doing this, very clearly why. And for me, I got to the point where actually, you know what, the thing that matters to me most is how we change the trajectory of our continent's development. And I believe that the way we build skills and the way we capacitate people is going to be a big part of that. And that's why I decided I need to go somehow into the learning space where I can marry the best we know about learning science and how the mind works with smart technology so we can build skills faster. My idea for Rekindled learning really came from my own schooling experience. I remember in high school, and I went to a very good school, but despite that, I thought, there's a lot of inefficiency in what we're doing there, because you'd write these tests and you would come back a week later maybe and you'd look at your test script and you see the stuff that you got wrong and right, and you would try and tell yourself, I should come back and look at the script before the next exam, before the next test. But no one really has the time to do that across all your subjects. And over the years, you sort of compound your weaknesses and you just focus more on your strengths, and you don't really have time to track where you might be weak and get feedback where you really sort of need the help. And when you look at environments today and companies or even poorer schools, that problem is exacerbated. That lack of feedback quickly and efficiently still exists today. So for example, in companies, they'll produce these awesome manuals, 300-page manuals, and maybe you do a 2 or 3 day workshop and you write a test then, and maybe you pass because you just heard it recently, but you kind of forget where most of it is at. And if you try and track what people know, they actually sort of retain very little, because that feedback loop is so weak and it's not reinforced enough. And it's even worse in poor schools, where you might just get a mark and you don't get a test script that tells you exactly where you got sort of wrong and right answers. So I thought to myself, this is a challenge. This feedback loop is a challenge that technology can solve quite easily. It can do it better than sort of most people. And that's really where I got the idea of the first product that we provide around the concept of micro-learning. So instead of these long manuals, instead of these passive learning engagements, you engage in short bite-sized sort of learning steps that are question-based. So it forces you to ask yourself questions and really assess whether you know something or not. And the system is smart enough to track the things that you get wrong and the stuff that you get right, and bring you back to the stuff that you get wrong more often, and until you demonstrate that you've actually gotten everything consistently correct. So you could be applying this to learning or preparing for a compliance exam in a company, or preparing for a maths exam as a student, or a nursing exam as a professional. And instead of reading passively, you can engage in content in this micro-learning way. And it's all based on research we've already known for a long time around how you overcome that forgetting curve, which basically speaks to the fact that you need to learn in small steps. You need to reinforce the things that you're weaker at, as opposed to trying to do everything evenly, which is what most people do, start from chapter 1 to the end and address everything evenly, as opposed to your weak areas. And most importantly, you need corrective feedback as soon as possible after you've made an error to increase your chances of retention. So normal testing environments don't actually give you that. And without that feedback loop, you waste a lot of sort of time in that learning. And we've seen significant results, particularly in financial services, where a lot of young people are trying to get jobs but come from poor learning environments. So when you ask them to prepare for a FICA exam or a phase exam and the like, preparing that documentation for themselves to prepare it for the exam is actually quite difficult for them. And once we package that content into these bite-sized learning steps, all you have to do is answer questions and keep going. The learning experience is now completely different, and it tracks where you're wrong and struggling anyway and brings you back to those areas automatically. So it almost takes away that administration that is only available to very diligent learners who can actually read something and independently self-assess. Very few people can actually do that. So I think this is one of the simplest approaches that one can use in a learning process to actually improve learning outcomes. And we're trying to expand that a bit more into universities as well. So this trend of microlearning becomes even more important in the mobile workforce where everyone is moving around. No one has time to sit in a class or sitting in front of a computer. And the idea that you can do this thing of just-in-time learning, or learning when you've got nothing to do and you're waiting for 10 minutes for someone to arrive at a meeting, and instead of just doing social media or instead of just doing an email, you can actually engage in a productive learning exercise. So I've got great faith that this is going to become a key part of learning in the future, because it's not as formal as we initially understood it, and it can be integrated into our daily lives without having to pull people out of their work environments, out of their life, to actually do some learning exercises. So after I had the concept of I want to try and create a product around this space, I also decided that instead of how I did it in my first business, where we got a lot of investment upfront and did a lot of R&D, I wanted to really go into the market sooner rather than later to really test where the market is, what are businesses thinking they need right now. So, and it will also avoid, if I could do that without having to invest a lot in CapEx, then I could get going without a big investor. So I did a lot of research and I found a university in Austria that was doing stuff quite similar to what I was imagining. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for me to be able to go and start engaging with customers. And that allowed me to immediately go into the market without having to think I need lots of funding, I need huge CapEx investment. And that was a very, very important step, because it allowed me to engage with where businesses were at and to truly understand their appetite and positioning for that. And microlearning 3 years ago was a very sort of unknown concept. And only now, in fact, 3 years after I spoke to some of those companies, are they coming back to say, actually, tell us again, what is this sort of microlearning thing about? So it was great, because I only had to finance operational and business development expenses, and that gave me time to wait out, to have the patience, to wait for customers and businesses to sort of catch on, which if you raise a lot of money up front and you need to know exactly how you're going to make it back immediately, can almost deter you from trying to understand the finesse and the detail of the effectiveness of the value proposition and the solution you're trying to put together. So over the years, we started accumulating customers one by one. And now we've got a couple of corporate customers and also engaging with universities. And only now that we've figured out a model of, okay, we can charge businesses for the setup fees. We can charge them as a cloud model where they pay per employee per month on the system. And this is the revenue model that is currently popular in the market that we can attach to this particular system. And then we can actually now get a business. We can build clients and we can generate revenue out of it. And we can articulate the value proposition to the end consumer much more clearly than I was able to do sort of 3 years ago. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't in the market and practicing and getting feedback and readjusting and refocusing and refining the solution. So I think it's a really, really important example for me that you don't become an entrepreneur when you get funding. You become an entrepreneur when you can convince a customer to buy something and they pay for it. And it adds value to sort of their life or their business. And the sooner you can get there, the sooner you can find a way to start in some small way, wherever you're coming from with what little you have, then you realize that's actually the essence of entrepreneurship. And it's very dangerous to think you need the big investment, the big deal, the big new CapEx project right now. Along the journey of sort of this entrepreneurial journey, for me, the most important resource has always been reading. So every time I hit a mental block and I hear a word in a meeting that I don't understand, I go and Google it and research it and read it. And every time I try to refine our proposition, it has been extensively about reading and becoming an expert in the learning space. So even though I wasn't educated as a teacher, as a trainer, I had to become an expert in that industry to really bring validity and legitimacy to my my business. And that I did largely by reading anything and everything about the industry. And that's really, really important, because you realize that you can become an expert in anything in the world today if you actually commit the time and you read extensively about it. And that for me is the most important form of mentorship, as opposed to the 1 hour or the 30 minutes that you're trying to get with someone. That is deep. It's contextual to what you need. So yeah, I'll read a great deal technically about the industry and a lot of biographies around other entrepreneurs in as related a space as possible to understand their journey. I do use sort of mentors for specific areas around financial management, for example. Accounting was just one of the things that I hated a great deal at varsity. So I brought an accountant in quite early on to the business, where previously, I would have delayed it and would have done invoicing and managing everything myself. I realized actually this takes a lot of my energy because it doesn't come naturally. I'm not that good at it. And if I commit to paying a small stipend every month for someone to do that for me, I'm completely free to do other things that actually add significant value into the business. And having that person talk to me and advise me through how I price my product, how I review some legal contracts, has been very helpful along the way of getting that sort of external input or peer input that I would not have been able to make as good a decision without. I think the other area I've been careful to seek assistance on quite early on is probably around labor relations and people management. So I've got a very good lawyer that we had met through our first business that I'm still using to sort of this day. And through them, I've learned so much about how, you structure a business, how you structure employment contracts, what to do when something's going wrong with a particular employee so that it's effective and compliant in the law. And having those people as the accountant and I think the lawyer for me has been the most sort of important. Then the rest was the hard work of calling customers. The next stage where you need a lot of help is when you are trying to raise funding and you want to work with someone who can advise you how to build value into your business as soon as possible and early on, so that you're able to have a stronger negotiating position when you try and raise equity funding. And that people that look at how money moves every day. So you need to speak to those people to help you position your business, because what you do every day is actually the operational mechanism of the business. There's a whole other capital mechanism that makes a business flourish, that if you don't have expertise, then you have to have someone advising you too. Otherwise, you'll miss some very simple pointers that could help your business build in more value. I think the first phase after you've proven the value proposition of your new product or service by getting those few customers on board is now to understand how you scale it. How do you get tens of customers every year? And that's the phase I'm at now with Rekindled Learning. And we've now understood better the operational model of how we could onboard customers faster, how we can get them using the system and turning learning outcomes out quicker. And now that enables us to sort of scale. And then the next big question is, how do we fund it? How do we get more people in there? Do we bring in an investor now? Do we get some debt financing now? So those are the big questions we sort of have to ask ourselves, but we're only getting there because we've done the refinement of the value proposition. And that's going to be a big part of the next 3 years for the business. So I think it's important to contextualize that I don't think I get here sort of all by myself. And I've always felt that I've stood on the shoulders of giants, and those really have been my parents sort of all along the journey. Even when they questioned what I was doing, they've never wavered sort of in their support. And I think I've been very privileged. It would be disingenuous to say I wasn't privileged, because ultimately I'm the second generation out of poverty, and I didn't have to worry about looking after my parents when I left university, so I could go on and do these things. And I learned the most important things that I would need for my business really from watching my parents. They grew up incredibly poor, and they worked hard and dared to believe that they could create a different life context for themselves. And I watched them excel as professionals, as architects and engineers, and build all these side businesses on the side. And they pursued everything with such brilliance and such focus. And I remember early on in my teens, they lost everything that they had built up for themselves. And I watched them start all over again. So for me, by the time I was 22 years old, I had seen this cycle of trusting in yourself, working hard, excelling in what you do and what it can achieve for your life. I had seen this play out twice over in my life. So I was very comfortable in myself that actually this is accessible. This is something I can do for myself as well. And if I hadn't been able to watch them, I probably would not have had that opportunity to do so. I think they were also exceptional parents, which helped me a lot, because exceptional parenting isn't about just loving your children and doting on them. They were exceptional in that they were exceptional people in and of themselves. They kept on learning. They kept on pushing themselves. And to this day, they're still learning new things. To this day, they're still getting up for gym at 5 o'clock in the morning to do things. So I had no excuse in my life ever to not push, to not pursue, to not try and excel, because my parents were always working even harder than I am still today. And that has molded so much of my thinking that I grew up thinking that was normal. And I only understood or saw mediocrity for the first time in my life in my 20s when I'm engaging in the workforce and with other companies. And to have that as a way of understanding of how the world works, I think gave me a huge privilege that I'm only really starting to appreciate now. It's made it so much easier for me to try and do the things that I'm doing now. A lot of the time, people will ask, how did you get so lucky? How did you get there? And I'm always very worried with that question, because I find as often we want to find an excuse to separate ourselves from someone, so that if we can say they're great and they're better, we don't have to strive for ourselves. And if you can make them other to you, then you don't have to explain why you haven't made better choices for your life. And I emphasize that because every day, whether you realize it or not, you do make a choice around how you're going to improve yourself, how you're going to add value at the place you work, how you're going to build up an organization if that's what you're doing. And most people will live their entire lives not realizing they are making choices every single day, and rather sort of abdicate it to the things that are happening around them, whether they grew up poor, whether they didn't go to a right school, whether you don't have lots of money. All of these things are contributing factors to life, but they were never the defining factors, because otherwise the people that had rich parents and went to great schools would all be the most successful. But that doesn't pan out that way. And we've got amazing stories of how people have decided to change the trajectory of their life. But that has to come from yourself. It has to come from you wanting to believe in a different life outcome for yourself, and that you are in the position to influence it and change that. And unfortunately, no one else can take you on that journey. And it's something you've got to push for yourself, even when you don't have the answers, even if it's not clear how you will get there. But staying with that question, which is, I think, what I did from that time in high school to the point where I started my first business. And since then, I have stayed with that question of, how can I change the things that I don't like about my life? How can I direct it to the things that I do, so that I've got nobody else to blame? And I can't say my life is like this because my parents did X, Y, or Z. And knowing that I have that power, knowing that I can wing it too, has been crucial for that life journey. And that agency is the most important thing that you can find for yourself.